The evening air in Oakhaven was always still, a blanket of quiet that settled over the small town as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sarah Miller liked it that way. She sat curled on her favorite armchair, a well-worn novel resting in her lap, the only light coming from the soft glow of a floor lamp beside her. The house was silent, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling. It was a familiar symphony, one she'd grown accustomed to since Mark passed away 2 years ago. Tonight, like most nights, was just her and the quiet. Suddenly, a loud, urgent knock shattered the peace. 3 distinct thuds echoing through the house. Sarah froze, her eyes wide, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart began a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. Nobody knocked this late in Oakhaven. Neighbors kept to themselves after dark, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Package deliveries were always left on the porch, announced by a text, not a fist against the door. A chill snaked up her spine, cold and unwelcome. Who could possibly be out there? She placed her book on the end table, her movements slow, deliberate, as if any sudden motion might invite more trouble. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. Bam, bam, bam. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor. It was desperate, frightened. Sarah pushed herself out of the chair, her legs feeling unsteady. Every horror movie she'd ever seen flashed through her mind. She told herself to be rational. It was probably just a teenager playing a prank, or someone with car trouble. Yes, that had to be it. Her bare feet made no sound on the hardwood floor as she crept toward the entryway. The living room light didn't quite reach the front door, leaving it shrouded in shadows. Her hand trembled as she reached for the deadbolt. Her heart was a jackhammer now, each beat a concussion in her ears. She could hear her own ragged breathing in the stillness. Another series of frantic pounds on the door made her jump. "Please, please, open up. Help me," a voice cried from the other side. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched with panic. Against every instinct screaming at her to stay hidden, to call the police, Sarah's hand closed around the cold metal of the lock. The voice sounded young, terrified. What if someone was really in danger? She couldn't just stand here and do nothing. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she twisted the lock. The click sounded deafeningly loud. She turned the doorknob, her palms slick with sweat, and pulled the heavy oak door inward just a crack. A sliver of the porch light cut through the darkness, illuminating a face. A young woman stood on her doorstep, her hair a wild mess, her clothes disheveled. But it was her eyes that held Sarah captive. They were wide with a terror so profound, so absolute, it seemed to suck all the air from the night. Tears streamed down her pale cheeks, and she was shaking uncontrollably, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold herself together. "Please," the woman sobbed, her voice a raw whisper. "You have to help me. He's coming." Sarah's blood ran cold. Who's coming?" she asked, her own voice barely audible. The woman didn't answer. Her eyes darted past Sarah, staring into the darkness of the street behind her, her expression one of pure, unadulterated fear. And in that moment, Sarah knew this wasn't a prank. This wasn't car trouble. The quiet she had cherished just moments ago was gone, replaced by a chilling premonition that the silence of Oakhaven was about to be broken in the most terrible way imaginable. She pulled the woman inside, quickly shutting and locking the door, the sound of the deadbolt sliding home doing little to calm the storm that had just erupted in her once peaceful life. The cold night air bit at Sarah's cheeks as she walked home, the rhythmic click of her heels the only sound on the deserted street. Street lights cast long, distorted shadows that danced just at the edge of her vision. She pulled her coat tighter, quickening her pace. That's when she saw him. A figure stumbled out of the darkness of an alleyway, a silhouette against the distant glow. He was young, maybe 22, his body racked with tremors. As he drew closer, the dim light revealed clothes caked in mud and torn at the seams. His breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. He locked eyes with her, a wild, hunted look in them. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep them at his sides. He took another unsteady step forward, his voice a raw, broken whisper that barely carried on the wind. "Please, I need help." Sarah instinctively took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her hand flew to her purse, fingers brushing against the cold metal of her keys. Was this a trap? A mugging? But the sheer terror in his eyes, it felt real. It felt chillingly authentic. "They're coming," he choked out, his gaze darting frantically back towards the empty alley he had just emerged from. Sarah scanned the street. It was completely empty. No cars, no other pedestrians, just an unnerving, profound silence that seemed to swallow all sound. The usual hum of the city was gone, replaced by a tense stillness that made the hairs on her arms stand up. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't just a quiet night. It felt like the world was holding its breath. "Who's coming?" she asked, her own voice sounding small and fragile in the oppressive quiet. She tried to keep a safe distance, her mind racing through a dozen different scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. The young man didn't answer directly. He just shook his head, a single tear tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "You can't see them," he whispered, his voice trembling with a conviction that scared Sarah more than any overt threat could. "But they're here. They hunt in the silence." He pointed a trembling finger not at the alley, but at the shadows themselves. The long, stretching darkness beneath a parked car, the inky blackness of a doorway across the street. "They move when you're not looking. They take you." His words were disjointed, nonsensical, but the raw fear behind them was undeniable. He looked like someone who had stared into an abyss and had barely managed to scramble away. Sarah was frozen, caught between the instinct to run and a burgeoning, terrifying curiosity. What had he seen? Was he suffering from a delusion, or had he witnessed something truly unspeakable? The silence pressed in on them again, and this time, Sarah thought she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound, like claws on pavement, coming from the direction of the alley. Her blood ran cold. The young man heard it too. His eyes widened in pure, abject horror. "It's too late," he whimpered, sinking to his knees. "They know you've seen me." Sarah's gaze snapped from the man to the alley, her breath catching in her throat. The scratching grew louder, closer, and a new sound joined it, a low, guttural clicking that seemed to vibrate through the solace of her shoes. The darkness in the alley seemed to deepen, to coalesce, as if gathering itself to pounce. He wasn't crazy. They were coming. The rain lashed against the windows, each drop a tiny fist beating against the glass. Sarah stood frozen, her hand on the doorknob. The boy on her porch was drenched, shivering, his eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond the storm. Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door shut, lock it, and pretend she'd seen nothing. This wasn't her problem. He was a stranger, a child out in the middle of the night, and letting him in could invite a world of trouble she couldn't even imagine. Her mind raced, a chaotic slideshow of news headlines and horror stories. What if he was a decoy? What if someone else was lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to open the door? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. But then, another voice cut through the noise. It was her father's, calm and steady, a memory from a long ago afternoon. They were in the park, and she just helped a smaller kid who had fallen off the swings. Her dad had knelt down, his eyes level with hers, and said, "Sarah, anyone can be a hero when there's an audience, but a real hero is the one who helps when no one is watching." The words echoed in her mind, as clear as if he were standing right beside her. No one was watching now. It was just her, the boy, and the storm. It was her moment to choose. Was she the person who locked the door on a child in need, or was she her father's daughter? Taking a deep breath that did little to calm her trembling hands, she made her decision. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a flicker of resolve. She pulled the door open wider, the wind and rain rushing into the warm, dry hallway. The boy flinched, as if expecting the door to be slammed in his face. Instead, he saw her small, reassuring smile. "Come inside," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You're safe here." The boy hesitated for only a second before scrambling inside, leaving a trail of rainwater on the polished wooden floor. Sarah quickly shut and locked the door, the click of the deadbolt sounding unnervingly final. She turned to face him, her heart still pounding, but now for a different reason. Inside, wrapped in a thick, fluffy blanket and sipping a mug of hot chocolate, the boy's story began to unfold, piece by horrifying piece. His name was Leo. He hadn't just been caught in the storm, he was running from a different kind of darkness. Earlier that evening, while taking a shortcut through an old industrial park, he had witnessed something he was never meant to see. A crime. He didn't have all the details, just a terrifying snapshot of angry voices, a struggle, and then a chilling silence. The men involved had seen him, just a fleeting glimpse of his red jacket as he ducked behind a stack of old pallets. That glimpse was enough. They had shouted, and the chase began. Leo explained that he ran without thinking, his small legs pumping, fueled by pure adrenaline and terror. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. He scrambled over fences, darted through alleys, and hid in overgrown bushes whenever he heard a car slow down. He ran for what felt like an eternity, his lungs burning, his sides aching. He told Sarah he had run for miles, the city lights blurring into a confusing maze until he finally stumbled onto her quiet, tree-lined street. Every house was dark, their windows like vacant eyes. All except for one, hers. A single, warm light glowed in the living room window, a beacon in the stormy darkness. That was why he chose her house. It looked like a place where someone was still awake. It looked like a place that might hold a sliver of hope. As he finished his story, he looked up at Sarah, his eyes pleading. "They're still looking for me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I know they are." And in that moment, Sarah knew her life had just changed forever. Suddenly, the stillness is broken. A car engine growls outside, its sound echoing through the quiet night, getting closer and closer. Headlights slice through the darkness, their bright beams sweeping across the living room window, painting a fleeting, stark picture of the room before plunging it back into shadow. Sarah's reaction is instantaneous. With a flick of a switch, the house goes dark. She moves to the window, peering cautiously through the blinds. A shiver runs down my spine. The atmosphere in the room thickens with tension. Sarah turns to the boy, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. She puts a finger to her lips, her voice a barely audible whisper, "Stay quiet." Her words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken danger. The boy's eyes dart towards the window, and without a second thought, he scrambles behind the large sofa, curling into a small ball, trying to make himself invisible. Outside, the car door slams shut, then the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path leading to the porch. One set, maybe more, each step is a hammer blow against the silent night. A dark figure, a shadow, looms near the window, a distorted silhouette against the faint moonlight. It pauses, listening, waiting. My heart is pounding in my chest. Who is it? What do they want? The shadow moves again, closer to the front door this time. The doorknob begins to turn, slowly, deliberately. Every sound is magnified in the silence, the creak of the floorboards, the boy's muffled breathing, the frantic beat of my own heart. This is no longer a safe haven, it's a cage, and the predator is at the door. We're trapped, and the only thing standing between us and the unknown threat is a flimsy wooden door. But in this moment of sheer terror, Sarah doesn't scream. She doesn't freeze. Instead, something shifts within her. The fear is still there. I can see it in her eyes, but it's overshadowed by an incredible, steely resolve. She's not just a woman caught in a nightmare, she's a protector. Her movements become fluid, deliberate. Instead of panicking, she reaches for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with surprising speed and precision. She's not making a call. That would be too loud, too risky. She's texting. She silently types out the 3 most important numbers, 911, a lifeline cast into the digital darkness. Her message is brief, urgent, conveying everything they need to know without a single spoken word. The response comes almost instantly, a small vibration against her palm. A message from the emergency dispatcher appears on the screen. Stay inside. Do not engage. Officers are on the way. Hope. A tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. Relief washes over me, but the danger is still right outside the door. Sarah doesn't waste a second. She moves with a quiet grace, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. She glides to the front door, her hand reaching for the deadbolt. Click. The sound is deafening in the silence, a clear message to whoever is outside. She moves to the back door, securing it as well. Click. Then, the windows, one by one, she checks the locks, ensuring their fragile fortress is as secure as it can be. With the house locked down, she doesn't hide, she doesn't cower. She walks back to the living room and positions herself directly between the couch where the boy is hiding and the front door. She stands there, a solitary guardian, her posture straight, her shoulders squared. She is strong. She is steady. She is utterly, breathtakingly unafraid. In her eyes, there is no longer fear, only a fierce, unwavering promise to protect the innocent life hiding behind her. She has become a shield, a wall of courage against the encroaching darkness. And as the shadow outside moves again, we all hold our breath, waiting for what comes next, knowing Sarah will face it head on. The pounding on the door was like a drumbeat of doom. Boom, boom, boom. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was angry, demanding. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Peeking through the curtains, she saw them. To figures, large and menacing, silhouetted by the dying light of the day, their faces were twisted with fury. She knew with a bone-deep certainty that these were the men the boy was running from. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. Her hand, slick with sweat, reached for the doorknob. She had to be convincing. She had to be unshakable. The boy's life, hidden just a few feet away in her closet, depended on her performance. She opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain lock on. A wall of cold, stale air and raw aggression hit her. "Have you seen a boy?" The voice was a low growl, laced with impatience. It scraped at her nerves. The man's eyes, small and dark, bored into her, trying to read her, trying to find a lie. He was tall, his shoulders broad enough to block out the world. His companion stood just behind him, a shadow with the same simmering rage. Sarah met his gaze. She channeled every ounce of strength she had, every acting class she ever took, every moment of calm she could muster. She let a sliver of annoyance color her voice, as if they were interrupting her quiet evening. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, almost bored. "No one came here. I've been home all evening." She held his stare, not blinking, not flinching. It was a battle of wills played out on her doorstep. The man's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe her. She could see the doubt warring with his urgency. His gaze flickered past her, trying to pierce the shadows of her hallway. "You sure about that?" He pressed, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "He's about 10, scrawny, ran this way." He was testing her, looking for the crack in her facade. Sarah stood her ground. "I'm sure," she repeated, her voice firm. "I would have noticed if a child came running through my yard." "Now, if you'll excuse me," she made a move to close the door, a silent dismissal. For a terrifying second, she thought he would shove it open, that his frustration would boil over into violence. He glanced around the porch, at the windows, at the quiet, unassuming house. He was calculating, weighing the risk of forcing his way in against the possibility that she was telling the truth. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. From inside the closet, she imagined the boy holding his breath, his small body trembling. "Don't make a sound," she pleaded silently. "Please, don't make a sound." Finally, with a grunt of frustration, the man stepped back. He shot one last, suspicious glare at her before turning away. "Let's go," he barked to his partner. "He's not here." They stomped off her porch and vanished into the encroaching darkness. Sarah waited until their footsteps faded completely before she sagged against the door, her legs turning to jelly. She slid the chain off, locked the deadbolt, and then leaned her forehead against the cool wood, gasping for air. She'd done it. They were gone. A moment later, a new sound sliced through the night. It started as a distant wail and grew steadily louder, closer. Sirens. A beautiful, glorious symphony of sirens. Red and blue lights began to dance across her living room walls, painting streaks of hope over the shadows. She rushed to the window just as police cars screeched to a halt in front of her house. Officers were out in a flash, their movements sharp and efficient. Sarah quickly opened the door. "He's in here," she called out, her voice trembling with relief. "He's safe." She led them to the closet. A gentle officer knelt down and spoke in a soft, reassuring voice. The closet door creaked open and the small boy emerged, blinking in the sudden light, his face streaked with tears but otherwise unharmed. He looked from the officer to Sarah, a look of profound, silent gratitude in his wide eyes. As paramedics checked on the boy, wrapping him in a warm blanket, one of the senior officers approached Sarah. He had kind eyes and a weary smile. "We got them," he said. "Picked them up just down the block." "Thanks to you." He looked at her, his expression full of respect. "You were incredibly brave. You didn't just save a boy from a bad situation tonight." He paused, his voice filled with sincerity. "You saved his life today." Those words washed over her, a tide of warmth and validation. Looking at the boy, now safe and sound, Sarah knew that in this small, quiet house, on this ordinary evening, she had done something truly extraordinary. The street lights cast long, lonely shadows on the pavement, the kind that swallow everything whole. For Sarah, sitting on her front steps, it felt like they were swallowing her too. The sirens had faded hours ago, leaving behind a silence that was somehow louder, more deafening than the chaos that had shattered the night. The danger was gone. The flashing lights, the urgent shouts, the brief, terrifying struggle, it was all over. But for Sarah, it was just beginning. She replayed the scene in her mind, a movie on an endless loop. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 17, his eyes wide with a fear that mirrored her own. He was cornered, backed against the brick wall of the old bookstore by two figures much larger, much angrier than him. It happened so fast, a demand, a shove, the glint of something sharp under the dim lamplight. Most people on the street just hurried past, heads down, pretending not to see. Sarah had started to do the same. It was the smart thing to do, right? The safe thing. Don't get involved. It's not your problem. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her to just keep walking, get home, lock the door. Her hand was already on her phone, ready to dial for help from a safe distance. But then she saw the boy's face. It wasn't just fear in his eyes, it was resignation. A look that said he'd been in this kind of situation before, and he knew how it ended. A look that said no one ever helped, and in that split second, something inside Sarah broke. The voice of self-preservation was drowned out by another, older voice, one that whispered about courage, about community, about the kind of person she wanted to be. She wasn't a hero, she was a librarian, for goodness sake. Her greatest daily conflict was a misplaced book or a jammed printer. But she couldn't just walk away. She couldn't be one of the shadows. So she did the stupidest, bravest thing she'd ever done. She stepped forward, She didn't shout. She didn't run. She just walked toward them, her phone held up, its screen glowing. "I'm on the phone with the police," she said, her voice shaking but surprisingly firm. "They have your description, and they're 2 blocks away." It was a total lie. She hadn't even dialed. But the bluff, combined with her sudden, calm appearance, was enough. The 2 figures hesitated, exchanged a look, and then melted back into the alleyway. Gone. The boy stood there, gasping for breath, staring at her as if she descended from the clouds. He stammered a thank you, his voice cracking with relief, before his own friends ran up to him, and he was swept away in a flurry of concern. Sarah just nodded, her legs feeling like jelly, and finally made her way home. Now, sitting on her steps in the quiet aftermath, the adrenaline was gone, replaced by a profound, trembling exhaustion. The street was peaceful again. The world had returned to normal, but Sarah was different. The decision she made in that single, heart-stopping moment hadn't just saved a stranger from harm, it had changed her. For years, she had seen herself as small, timid, someone who avoided confrontation at all costs. She was the person who stayed quiet in meetings, who let others cut in line, who believed her own voice didn't matter much. She had built a comfortable, safe life by staying on the sidelines. But tonight, she had stepped onto the field. And she hadn't just survived, she had made a difference. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she hadn't realized was missing. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was recognition. She was recognizing a part of herself she had kept hidden, locked away out of fear. It was the quiet, unassuming courage of an ordinary person who chose not to look away. She looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. They were the hands of a librarian, hands that stamped books and typed on a keyboard. But tonight, they were also the hands of someone who had stood up to the darkness. The world was full of big, headline-grabbing heroes. But maybe, she thought, true courage wasn't about capes and superpowers. Maybe it was about the small, terrifying choices made on quiet streets. It was about the decision to be a flicker of light when everyone else was content to be a shadow. The boy would probably never know her name. He would move on, his life hopefully a little safer, a little brighter because of a stranger's lie. But his life wasn't the only one that had been altered tonight. Sarah's had been too. The fear was still there, a faint echo in the back of her mind. But for the first time in a very long time, it wasn't the only thing she could hear. Above it, clear and strong, was the sound of her own voice, and it was a voice she was finally starting to like. She took a deep breath of the cool night air, stood up, and went inside, locking the door not out of fear, but out of a newfound sense of peace. The house was the same, but the person inside it was brand new. We often think of heroes as larger-than-life figures, people in capes or uniforms, performing grand, spectacular deeds that make the headlines. We look for them on movie screens and in history books, believing that heroism is something extraordinary, something reserved for the chosen few. But what if we've been looking in the wrong places? What if true heroism isn't always about the grand gestures? Think about it. Real life isn't a blockbuster movie. It's a collection of small moments, everyday interactions, and simple choices. It's the decision to check on a neighbor you haven't seen in a few days. It's offering a kind word to a stranger who looks like they're having a rough day. It's the courage to speak up when you see something that isn't right, even if your voice shakes. These moments might not get a standing ovation, but they are the threads that weave the fabric of a compassionate society. The heroes we need most are often the ones who live right next door. They're the ones who notice when something is amiss, who aren't afraid to get involved, and who believe in the power of community. They understand that looking out for one another is not an obligation, but a privilege. They're the friend who calls just to listen, the teacher who stays late to help a struggling student, or the coworker who offers a helping hand without being asked. These everyday heroes don't seek recognition. Their reward is the knowledge that they made a difference, no matter how small it may seem. They show us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. They remind us that empathy is a superpower we all possess. So, the next time you hear an unexpected knock, or you feel that little nudge to reach out to someone, remember this. Sometimes, a simple knock on the door becomes the moment that reveals a true hero, and that hero could be you. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that celebrates the hero in all of us. See you next time.